Hey guys, this is John Peter. Thanks for listening to That's the Word. In a recent story, Give Him Up, we asked a trivia question whose answer, it turns out, was a lot more involved than we originally thought. Father James and I recorded a segment where we go into detail about this answer, or lack thereof. It got a bit long, so instead of putting it at the end of a normal story, we decided to put it up as a bonus episode. So please, enjoy this bonus episode going into great depth and detail about what's so interesting about the trivia question from the story, Give Him Up.
Speaking of stories, we have something to share about a previous story we told.
Spoiler alert for the last week's story, Give Him Up. So if you have not listened to Give Him Up, this is your spoiler warning. Stop now and go listen to that one, then come back and hear this explainer. Last week's trivia question was, at what church was the Pope at during these events with the story which took place in Rome? Now, given the chaos and I guess poor skimming in the research, we had thought that the story took place during the Avignon papacy, during the Babylonian captivity, as it's called, when the popes were in Avignon instead of in Rome. Part of the reason why was because of the chaos that existed in Rome, as can be seen in this story, but this story isn't during the Avignon papacy.
Dun, dun, dun.
This story is during the events afterward, which were much, much, much worse. The Pope returned to Rome. He died. The next Pope was elected, and the Roman crowds are rioting to try to make sure that the papacy stayed in Rome. So the cardinals elected Urban VI, but then a bunch of them left to Avignon and elected another Pope in Avignon. So now you have a Roman Pope and an Avignon Pope. The Avignon Pope is generally considered at this point to be an anti-Pope. However, years later, because these two lines of succession stayed around and Europe was divided, the Christian world was divided between which of these popes they held allegiance to. So a council came together in Pisa to determine who is a legitimate pope, and they said, none of you are going to be the legitimate pope. We are going to say that you two resign, and we're going to elect a new pope. That pope was Pope Alexander, except he may be an anti-pope. Gregory the 12th.
Did we make mud out of all this?
Potentially. So Gregory the 12th was the pope in Rome at the time of this election of Alexander. Now, through the history since then, the church hasn't really stated which of these popes was the actual legitimate pope. It tends to favor the Roman side, except that the official list, or I guess not an official list, but a list that was published by the Vatican switched from Gregory the 12th to Alexander after he was elected in Pisa, and then his successor, John the 23rd, before everything was finally resolved when everybody resigned and Martin V was elected. However,
I'm just thinking like, okay, if I'm taking notes here, we're just like, oh, we're in Avignon, oh, we're back. And then finally it must be resolved. And it's like, no, it got worse. And then now we have Martin V. However, continue.
This is going somewhere, I promise. When John the 23rd, Pope St. John the 23rd, is he saint or is he blessed?
St. John the 23rd from the 1960s, right?
That's right, yes.
Yeah.
Pope St. John the 23rd was elected. He chose the name John, and he said, actually, I am the 23rd one, not the last guy. Because the last guy, I'm going to say, was maybe not legitimate. So now the official, or I guess semi-official list that comes when the stuff that comes from the Vatican shows the Pope being Gregory the 12th all the way up to his resignation to allow Martin V to be Pope. All that's to say is that actually our source is old enough. It's from about late 1800s or so that it called Alexander the legitimate Pope and Gregory the 12th the anti-Pope. So it sounds like Gregory the 12th was in Rome at this time when everybody's getting overrun by everybody else. I think he was backed up by the King of Naples. and the king of Naples was the one who this count was working for when they're overrunning Rome. Francis of Rome's family held allegiance to Alexander after the council in Pisa. So they're saying that that's a legitimate pope. Anyway, all this goes to say, probably the answer to the question, at what church was the pope staying during the story, is we don't know, because we're not really even sure who was pope at that point.
And just to be clear, that was not our original intention when providing the trivia question from our previous story.
Right. Our original intention was, haha, he wasn't in Rome. He was in Avignon.
Joke's on us.
Yes, but yeah, joke's on us. So it may still be, haha, no, the Pope was in Pisa, or it may be he was maybe somewhere in Rome. I don't know if he was actually staying in Rome at this point, given all the chaos in the city and the armies overrunning it on both sides. Though one answer may be he was in the Apostolic Palace in the Vatican. When the Pope returned from Avignon to Rome, the Lateran Palace, where the Pope was before they moved to Avignon, had burned down. So they didn't go back to the Lateran Palace. It sounds like, from the bits and pieces of research that we found, that he bounced around to a few different churches before finally settling in the palaces in the Vatican. However, that's not clear. And if someone knows the answer to this, we are genuinely curious as to where exactly the Pope is. We'll give credit to those who say that he was in the Vatican Palace. Someone said he was at Santa Maria Aracelli. That I'm pretty sure was not correct, but it was a good guess. So credit to June, who said the Apostolic Palace in Vatican City, the recently completed Apostolic Palace. That may be true. So we'll give you that one.
That is probably the longest explanation of not just a trivia question, but of a previous story that I've ever heard.
That's the longest explanation of anything I think we've ever done in this podcast. And hopefully it will be the longest one. The Western Schism is not a clear, concise, or straightforward topic.